still remember the sound of Blake's footsteps on our hardwood floor that morning, deliberate, measured, like he was already walking away from me. It was 3:47 a.m. when I finally slipped through our front door, shoes in hand, trying desperately not to wake him. But there he sat in his favorite armchair, still dressed in yesterday's clothes, with that look I'd never seen before. Not anger, exactly. Something colder, something final. "Where were you, Rose?" 4 simple words that would unravel everything we'd built together. I met Blake 9 years ago at a wine tasting event downtown. I wasn't even supposed to be there. My coworker Jenna had dragged me along after I'd spent another Saturday night alone with takeout and Netflix. I was 25 then, working as a marketing coordinator for a small publishing house, still figuring out who I was supposed to be. Blake was 30, confident in a way that wasn't arrogant, with these deep brown eyes that seemed to actually listen when you spoke. He approached me while I was pretending to know the difference between a Pinot Noir and a Cabernet Sauvignon, swirling my glass like I'd seen people do in movies. "The secret," he said, appearing beside me with a gentle smile, "is that half the people here are just making it up as they go along." I laughed, genuinely surprised. "And the other half? They're sommeliers, and they're judging us quietly." That was Blake. He had this way of making everything feel lighter, more manageable. He was a project manager at a renewable energy company, the kind of person who genuinely cared about making the world better. When he talked about installing solar panels for schools in underserved communities, his whole face would light up. I found that incredibly attractive, a man with purpose. We dated for 2 years before he proposed on the beach in Maine where his family had a summer cottage. It wasn't elaborate, just him, me, and the sound of waves against the rocks. The ring was his grandmother's, a simple gold band with a small diamond that caught the morning light perfectly. I said yes before he'd even finished asking the question. Our wedding was everything I'd dreamed of, small, intimate, held in the garden of a bed and breakfast outside the city. Blake's parents flew in from Colorado, my family came up from Virginia, and our closest friends surrounded us as we promised to love each other through everything. I wore my mother's dress, altered to fit, and Blake cried during his vows. I should have paid more attention to those tears, to the pure emotion in his voice when he promised to trust me completely. The first few years of our marriage were blissful in that ordinary, comfortable way that I thought would last forever. We bought a colonial-style house with a red front door and spent weekends painting rooms and planting a garden. Blake would make coffee every morning and leave it on my nightstand before his run. I'd pack his lunch and slip little notes inside. Nothing profound, just "have a great day" or "love you." We had our routines, our inside jokes, our shared dreams of someday having children and teaching them to ride bikes in our driveway. But somewhere around year 5, the routines started feeling less like comfort and more like confinement. Blake's work became increasingly demanding. He was leading a major wind farm project that required frequent travel. I'd gotten promoted to marketing director, which meant longer hours and constant pressure to prove myself in a field dominated by people who seemed to have figured out the rules of success long before I arrived. We started missing each other, not just physically, but emotionally. Conversations became transactional: who would pick up groceries, whose turn it was to call the plumber, whether we could afford to replace the washing machine. The notes in his lunch stopped. He stopped making coffee for me. We still said, "I love you," but it felt automatic, like saying "bless you" after someone sneezes. I told myself this was normal, that every marriage went through phases. My mother had warned me about this, the 7-year itch, she called it, though we were only at 6. "Marriage isn't a fairy tale, Rose," she'd said during one of our Sunday phone calls. "It's work. Some days you choose to love even when you don't feel it." But I wanted to feel it. I missed feeling desired, feeling interesting, feeling like someone's priority instead of just another item on their to-do list. Blake and I had become roommates who happened to share a bed and a mortgage. Then came Stella's birthday party. Stella was my college roommate, the kind of friend who knew all my secrets and still loved me anyway. She was turning 35 and had decided to celebrate with what she called "one last hurrah before I become a responsible adult." though she'd been saying that since we were 22. The party was at her loft downtown, and she'd promised good wine, better music, and absolutely no talk about mortgages or mutual funds. Blake wasn't feeling well that weekend, something he'd picked up during his latest business trip, so I went alone. I almost didn't go at all. I was tired from a brutal week at work, and the idea of putting on a party dress and pretending to be social felt exhausting. But Stella had insisted, and honestly, I needed a break from the quiet tension that had settled over our house like dust. The party was exactly what Stella had promised. Her loft was filled with people I hadn't seen in years. The music was loud enough to drown out thoughts, and the wine was flowing freely. I found myself laughing for the first time in months, really laughing, the kind that makes your cheeks hurt. I danced with old college friends, told stories about my ridiculous boss, and for a few hours, I forgot about the careful distance Blake and I had been maintaining. That's when I ran into Jordan. Jordan had been in my graduate program. We'd taken several classes together and had always gotten along well. He was smart, funny, and had this way of making academic theories sound actually interesting. I hadn't seen him since graduation 4 years ago, and when he spotted me across the room, his face lit up with genuine pleasure. "Rose Mitchell." "Or should I say Rose Henderson now?" he said, pulling me into a friendly hug. "Henderson Mitchell, actually," I corrected, though the hyphenated name suddenly felt clunky in my mouth. "I kept both names." We spent the next hour catching up. Jordan was working as a market research analyst for a company that specialized in sustainable consumer products. He was passionate about his work in the same way Blake used to be about his, but there was an energy about Jordan that felt infectious. He listened intently when I talked about my job, asked thoughtful questions, and made me feel like what I was saying actually mattered. When Stella announced she was taking the party to a rooftop bar downtown, Jordan asked if I wanted to share a cab. It seemed harmless enough. We were part of a group, just continuing the conversation, extending a fun evening. Blake was probably asleep anyway, and I deserved one night out with friends. The rooftop bar was beautiful, string lights and city views, craft cocktails with names like Midnight in Manhattan and Garden Party. Our group claimed a corner table, and somehow Jordan and I ended up sitting next to each other, our chairs pulled close so we could hear each other over the music and chatter. He told me about his recent trip to Costa Rica, where his company had been researching sustainable packaging alternatives. I found myself leaning in, captivated by his stories about hiking through rainforests and meeting with local entrepreneurs. When he laughed, his whole body moved, and when he looked at me, I felt like he was really seeing me not just Blake's wife or the marketing director with the corner office, but me. "You should come with me next time," he said at one point, and even though we both knew it was just the kind of thing you say after a few drinks, the possibility hung in the air between us like a dare. The night stretched on much longer than I'd planned. What was supposed to be a quick birthday celebration turned into bar hopping with Stella's group, then a late-night diner for what Jordan called the best apple pie in the city. I kept checking my phone, watching the hours tick by, 11 p.m., midnight, 1 a.m. I knew I should go home, but every time I mentioned leaving, someone would order another round or suggest another place, and Jordan would give me this hopeful look that made me want to stay just a little longer. It wasn't until 3 a.m. that I finally insisted on going home. Jordan offered to share a cab since we were going in the same direction, and during that 20-minute ride, something shifted between us. Maybe it was the lateness of the hour, or the way the city lights blurred past the window, or the fact that we were sitting close enough that I could smell his cologne. When he walked me to my front door, there was a moment, just a moment, where we stood too close, where I could have made a choice that would have changed everything. But I didn't. I hugged him goodbye, thanked him for a wonderful evening, and watched him get back into the cab. I thought that would be the end of it, a fun night out, a reminder that I was still someone people enjoyed talking to, a small rebellion against the routine that my life had become. I had no idea Blake had been waiting up for me. "Where were you, Rose?" I stood in our doorway, still holding my shoes, trying to process the scene. Blake never waited up. He was an early riser who went to bed at 10:30 without fail. Yet here he was at almost 4 a.m., fully dressed, with that terrible, calm expression I'd never seen before. "Stella's birthday party," I said, setting my shoes down carefully. "I told you about it this morning. Stella's party ended at 11. I called the restaurant." My heart started beating faster. "We went to a few other places afterward. You know how Stella is, she wanted to keep celebrating." Blake nodded slowly, like he was considering this explanation. "And your phone died." I pulled my phone from my purse, glancing at the screen. 3 missed calls from Blake, all after 2 a.m. "No, it was loud and I had it on silent. I didn't realize you'd called." "I see." He stood up from the chair, and I noticed for the first time how tired he looked. Not just sleepy tired, but exhausted in a deeper way, like something inside him had been drained. "And you were with Stella all night?" "Well, not just Stella. There was a whole group of us." "Anyone I know?" The question felt loaded, dangerous. "Some college friends, people from her work. You know, the usual party mix." Blake walked over to me, close enough that I could see the disappointment in his eyes. "Rose, I've known you for 9 years. You've never come home this late from anything. You've never not answered your phone when I've called 3 times. And you've never," he paused, studying my face, "you've never lied to me about where you've been." "I'm not lying." But even as I said it, I could hear the defensiveness in my voice, the slight tremor that betrayed me. "Jordan Phillips," Blake said quietly, "from your graduate program, works for EcoMark Research, lives on the Upper West Side." The blood drained from my face. "How do you?" Stella posted pictures from the party on Instagram. "You're in several of them, sitting very close to a man who is definitely not me, so I looked him up." Blake's voice remained unnaturally calm, which somehow made it worse than if he'd been shouting. "Did you sleep with him?" "No." The word came out louder than I'd intended. "Blake, no, nothing happened. We just talked and went to a few bars with a group and until 3 a.m. It wasn't just us. There were other people. But you wanted it to be just you." The accuracy of that statement hit me like a physical blow, because he was right, wasn't he? Somewhere during that evening, I had wanted it to be just Jordan and me. I had enjoyed his attention, his interest, the way he made me feel alive and interesting and desired. I hadn't acted on it, but I had wanted to. "Blake," I started, but he held up his hand. "I need you to understand something, Rose. I didn't call you 3 times because I was checking up on you. I called because I was worried. When midnight passed and you weren't home, I started thinking about car accidents, about something terrible happening to you. When 2 a.m. came and went, I was ready to call hospitals." The guilt hit me like a wave. I sank onto our couch, suddenly understanding the full weight of what I'd done. It wasn't just about staying out late or even about the attraction I'd felt to Jordan. It was about the choice I'd made to prioritize my own desires over Blake's peace of mind, over the trust he'd placed in me. "I'm sorry," I whispered. "I should have called. I should have come home earlier." "Yes, you should have." He sat down across from me, not beside me like he usually would. "But that's not really the problem, is it?" I looked up at him, confused. "The problem is that you didn't want to come home earlier. The problem is that you were happier being there with him than being here with me." Tears started forming in my eyes because, again, he was absolutely right. I had been happier. For the first time in months, I'd felt like myself instead of this tired, disconnected version of the person I used to be. "Blake, our marriage has been what, Rose? Difficult, boring, not exciting enough for you. That's not fair, isn't it?" He leaned forward, and I could see the hurt behind his calm facade. "When was the last time you looked at me the way you were looking at him in those photos? When was the last time you laughed with me the way you were laughing with him?" I wanted to argue, to defend myself, but I couldn't find the words. Because the truth was, I couldn't remember the last time I'd looked forward to talking to Blake the way I'd looked forward to every conversation with Jordan that night. "I love you," I said, and I meant it. But even as the words came out, they felt insufficient, like trying to patch a dam with a Band-Aid. "I know you do," Blake replied sadly, "but you're not in love with me anymore." The distinction hit me hard because it was true. I loved Blake the way you love a family member, out of habit, out of history, out of genuine care for his well-being. But that butterflies in your stomach, can't wait to see him, want to share everything with him kind of love. That had been fading for so long I'd almost forgotten what it felt like, until Jordan reminded me. "I want to work on this," I said desperately. "I want us to work on this. Tonight was a mistake." We talked until sunrise. One of those conversations that feels like surgery without anesthesia, necessary but excruciating. Blake was calm throughout most of it, which was somehow worse than if he'd been angry. Anger would have felt like passion, like something worth fighting for. His calm felt like resignation, like he'd already made his decision and was just waiting for me to catch up. He didn't accuse me of cheating, didn't demand to see my phone, didn't forbid me from seeing Jordan again. Instead, he asked questions that cut straight to the heart of everything. Did I still want to be married to him? Did I still find him attractive? Did I still enjoy his company? When I thought about our future together, did it excite me or just feel inevitable? I tried to answer honestly, but honesty felt cruel. How do you tell someone you love that they've become background noise in your life? How do you explain that somewhere along the way, they stopped being a person you chose and became a person you were just used to? I think, Blake said as the sun started filtering through our kitchen windows, we both need some time to figure out what we really want. What does that mean? It means I'm going to stay at my brother's place for a while, and you're going to decide whether you want to be married to me or whether you just don't want to be alone. The following weeks were the strangest of my life. Blake packed a suitcase and left for his brother's apartment across town, kissing me gently on the forehead before he went, a gesture that felt like both forgiveness and goodbye. Our house felt enormous and empty without him, every creak and settle amplified in the silence. I threw myself into work, staying late at the office and accepting every project that came my way. Colleagues started commenting on my dedication, not realizing that I was just avoiding going home to a house full of memories and regret. I meal prepped for one, watched television shows Blake hated, and rearranged furniture like I was trying to physically reshape our life. Jordan called a few days after the party, thanking me for a wonderful evening and suggesting we get coffee sometime. I stared at his name on my phone screen for a full 5 minutes before declining politely. What was the point? Even if Blake and I couldn't find our way back to each other, starting something with Jordan would just be repeating the same pattern, running towards something new instead of dealing with what was real. Blake and I met for dinner 2 weeks later at a neutral restaurant downtown. He looked good, rested, calmer somehow. He asked about my work, told me about the project he was finishing up, and for a few minutes it felt like we were just old friends catching up. But underneath, the pleasant conversation was the weight of everything we weren't saying. "Have you thought about what you want?" he asked finally, cutting straight through the small talk. I had thought about it. I'd thought about little else. I'd made lists of Blake's good qualities, his reliability, his kindness, his unwavering support of my career. I'd made lists of our good memories, lazy Sunday mornings, vacations to places we'd never been, the way he held me when my father was in the hospital. I'd even made a list of all the reasons Jordan was wrong for me. We barely knew each other. The attraction was probably just novelty. Building a relationship on the ruins of my marriage was a terrible foundation for anything lasting. But none of the lists changed the fundamental truth. I had stopped choosing Blake a long time ago, and he deserved someone who chose him every day. "I want you to be happy," I said, which wasn't really an answer. "That's not what I asked." "I know." I took a breath, trying to find courage I wasn't sure I possessed. "I think you were right that night. I love you, but I'm not in love with you anymore, and I don't think you're in love with me either." Blake was quiet for a long moment, turning his wedding ring around his finger, a nervous habit he'd had since our engagement. "I was," he said finally, "but somewhere along the way, loving you became like loving a memory. I was in love with who we used to be, not who we are now. So what do we do? I think we both know what we have to do." The divorce was surprisingly amicable. We used the same lawyer, divided our assets fairly, and managed to avoid the bitter accusations that destroy so many couples. Blake moved into a one-bedroom apartment closer to his office. I kept the house, though it felt too big and full of echoes. Our friends were shocked. We'd always seemed so stable, so well-suited. My mother cried when I told her, not just for the end of my marriage, but for what she saw as a failure of commitment. "Your father and I had rough patches too," she said, "but we worked through them. That's what marriage is." Maybe she was right. Maybe with more effort, more counseling, more willingness to fight for what we'd built, Blake and I could have found our way back to each other. But I've come to believe that sometimes love isn't enough. Sometimes two good people can love each other deeply and still not be right for each other anymore. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let someone go so they can find the person who will choose them every single day. Blake met someone new about 6 months after our divorce was finalized. Her name is Caroline, and from what I heard through mutual friends, she's everything I'm not: outdoorsy, optimistic, someone who genuinely loves hiking and camping and all the adventure sports Blake had always wanted to try. I saw them once at a farmer's market downtown, laughing over heirloom tomatoes, and Blake looked happier than I'd seen him in years. I felt a sharp pang of something, not jealousy exactly, but regret. Not for the end of our marriage, but for how long we'd both settled for less than what we deserved. As for Jordan, we never did get that coffee. I realized that what I'd felt that night wasn't really about him. It was about remembering what it felt like to be seen, to be interesting to someone, to feel that spark of connection that had been missing from my life. But building something real requires more than just spark. It requires choosing someone even when they're grumpy in the morning, even when they leave dishes in the sink, even when they don't laugh at your jokes. I'm single now, living alone in our old house with a garden I've learned to tend and rooms I've slowly made my own. I date occasionally, carefully, with a better understanding of what I'm looking for and what I'm willing to give. I've learned to enjoy my own company again, to find fulfillment in my work and friendships, instead of expecting one person to be everything to me. Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I'd just called Blake that night, if I'd come home at a reasonable hour instead of chasing a feeling I'd forgotten I was capable of having. Would we have found our way back to each other? Or would we have just delayed the inevitable? I'll never know for sure. But what I do know is this: Blake deserved better than a wife who stayed out all night with another man, and I deserved better than a marriage that felt like going through the motions. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit when something isn't working anymore, even when that something is good and safe and everything you thought you wanted. The night I came home late from that party wasn't the end of my marriage. It was just the moment we both finally acknowledged what had been true for a long time. We had grown into different people with different dreams, and love alone wasn't enough to bridge that gap. I still miss Blake sometimes, especially on Sunday mornings when the house feels too quiet. But I don't regret the choice we made. We both deserve to be chosen, to be someone's priority, to be loved with the kind of passion that doesn't require lists or reasons or convincing. And maybe someday we'll both find that with someone else.